there. Welcome to Storytime Live. I'm Dr. Jennifer Bird. I'm a biblical scholar, and I care very much about what people do with what they find in the Bible. I am checking in from my family's home. I have my oldest brother lives in the LA area, and it's because of him and his wife. My brother's David, his wife is Karina. It's because of them and their support of me in lots of different ways that I was even able to go to the conference this year. So the title today is, you won't believe the things I heard this week. I got to go to the annual conference that is for biblical scholars and for scholars of religion. That covers a lot of territory, especially the scholars of religion. That covers people who do things like what we call ethics, right? So Christian ethics, Judaic ethics, or Jewish ethics. It covers theology. It covers doing theology in any particular tradition, but it also covers studying religion as a whole, like as a field. It covers what people call comparative theology or comparative religious studies. It covers a whole range of things. And I started going, the first time I went was in 2001, and I just started as PhD student. If you think about the year 2001, and this event happens every year right before Thanksgiving for people in the United States. It was 2 months after the attack on this country. It was an interesting year to start this kind of a convention, but I have watched some really interesting changes take place over the 20 some years that I've been going. I also haven't been in 7 years, so there's a lot that's changed since 2017. So it was fun to be there, but it was also really, I just, I have lots of observations. I don't expect you all to want to hear all of these observations, but I thought it would be fun to try to see if you're interested in hearing anything about this. When I say that there's the two different fields, biblical studies and studies of religion, the field of biblical studies also has a lot of subgroups as well. So you'll have people who are there who are trained in Hebrew Bible. You have people trained in Newer Testament. So that's their focus. When you have a PhD in, say, New Testament early Christianity, which is what my PhD is in, you will have, you have spent at least 2 years in a master's degree, at least 2 years in doctoral studies work, which includes all these classes you're taking in your area to try to grasp the depth and the breadth of your field, what has been done before, what is, where's the state of the studies, the field in your area, what in the broad sense, and then also what it is you want to kind of focus in on, learning as much as you can about that one little sliver or one little narrow bit, right? And learning as much about that as you can so that you're familiar with the different conversations taking place. So having the privilege of doing a PhD means you have at least 4 years of full-time, very intensive study in that, in basics and, foundational work, and then also specialized work. There are also languages that you're learning alongside of it. And when you're a biblical scholar, you have at least 2 biblical languages that you're going to study for more than 1 year. And you have, in biblical studies, you're going to have to do at least 2 European languages so that you can read the scholarship that pertains to your field in other languages. Someone like Matt Monger, who came on this a couple weeks ago, or just a week ago, I guess, 2 weeks ago. Yeah. If you picked up on what he was saying, he's studied at least 10, 12, maybe 15 different languages. So people like Matt Monger are doing things like ancient Near Eastern studies, and that falls kind of more generally under the, sometimes it falls under biblical studies, sometimes it falls under the study of religion. So it really depends. So there's 2 different large fields that have some overlap. And so for the most part, in the last 40 years, they've met together. And there were a couple of years that these 2 groups didn't meet together. It was nice when they came back together. It's kind of a joke that the people leading, the people in the offices for those 2 different groups were fighting about things. So the parents were fighting and the kids were the ones that were being harmed by it. Everybody loved it when they came back together. So there were probably about 12,000 people there in San Diego for this conference that started Saturday. And so that's a little bit of rundown of what happens. The field is referred to. My field is the Society of Biblical Literature. That's what I've been a part of since 2001. And then the kind of the sister field or whatever is referred to. It's a terrible misnomer. It's referred to as the American Academy of Religion. That's not fair, and I'm certain that they've had conversations about changing the name, because obviously that doesn't apply to anyone outside of North America, right? And even just population speaking, there are more people in Africa than in North America. There are people in Europe, people in Asia, Australia. So it's kind of I'm sure there's a conversation there, and there's probably a fun history about people suggesting we change the name and why that hasn't been changed. So I'm certain that there's a story to tell there. People are trying to rectify that, but anyway, so people get together once a year to do this thing and to have. I was telling my sister-in-law, I think there were 350 sessions for biblical studies, or did that include both? I guess that included both. So 370 sessions on Saturday for both fields combined. And so we're kind of all meeting the same convention center and then also using spaces in the hotels nearby, things like that. But if you think about that, 370 sessions on Saturday. And so it's a 2-hour window, maybe 2.5-hour window for a session. So there are only 3, primary time frames within biblical studies. There are 4 or so within the religious studies. So we're kind of not overlapping, and there's so much happening every single hour of the day. You really, you have different interests, right? So, but even within my own kind of ideological, critical studies, critical thinking stuff, there's a lot that's always happening. So you got to choose. You got to pick and choose. You don't get to see or hear every paper you want to hear, that you'd be interested in, or you don't get to see everybody that you want to see. And so anyway, that's a little bit of what's been going on. I think I've been chatting about it a little bit with Kip when he was on, and I think Matt and I may have chatted about it. So that's a little bit more. I don't know if you have questions about this. Thanks, James. You said you wanted to hear all of my observations, but I'd be happy with any of it. I do have a lot of observations, and in particular, some that pertain to this space, the public scholar space. Let's see. I didn't think. Hang on, that might be a better angle if I can lift that up a little bit. Hang on. That might be a little bit better. Anyway, sorry for I don't have all my lights and things here. So the thing is, you won't believe the things I heard. And so let me do that. Let me do a little bit of what did I see and hear, and then I'll talk a little bit more about some of my observations about the field or the public scholarship element of things and how that's shifting a little bit, the dynamic at this conference. So let's talk about some of the papers. I was late. I don't have the funds to be there the whole time. I also, for personal reasons, didn't want to be there the whole time this time. And so I focused on, I had a panel. There was a panel reviewing my book, Marriage in the Bible. What do the texts say? So there were 4 biblical scholars and 1 Christian ethicist who were doing a review of that book. So they each had 20 minutes to say something about the book. They also all knew going into this that all of our comments on that panel, my intro comments and whatever the reviewers were going to say, that was all going to be published in the Journal of Feminist Studies and Religion, JFSR, Journal of Feminist Studies and Religion. So that'll probably be published in December or January if you're interested. I think there is a bit of a paywall behind that. So I don't know. I'll see what I can do about making it available if you're interested. But so I'll talk about that in a minute. But so that was the main reason I needed to be there. So I didn't show up until Sunday. But I do have to say, it was kind of sweet as soon as I walked into the convention center to get my book bag, because that's part of the swag at this conference is a really nice bag for books there, but then I use it for groceries year round kind of a thing. So toting things to work and back, and sometimes use it for my workout bag. Like they're really great bags. So it's one of the pieces of the conference. So I had just picked up my bag and was still working on stuffing my name tag into my lanyard or whatever. And someone walked up to me and introduced himself to me and said, "Dr. Bird, I appreciate the work you do, or your videos or whatever. And can we get a selfie?" And I was like, "Oh, that's I'd be honored." That's probably the first time that's happened, and that was really sweet. So anyway, that was a nice way to start the conference. But that day, I did go visit the books. So there aren't as many publishers that show up for the books to sell the books that they have in our field, for people in our field. The new things that just came out, things like textbooks or other books that you might want to use instead of textbooks. There were probably only 60 publishers there this time. And I say only, so it's smaller than it used to be. The books used to fill up the entire, kind of main convention space, main meeting space in the convention center. And it probably was only, 2/3 full, half full. So 2/3 probably. So it's an interesting thing what being able to sell books online has changed things over the 20 years for me. My being there in 23 years. So it's kind of interesting, a good thing, I suppose, but there's also something there. It was just delicious, to walk into this huge, meeting space, and they're just row after row of books and publishers and all kinds of interesting thought and things you wouldn't have even known to look for, or I don't know. So, and it's really interesting, the politics of it all. So the mix of publishers who were there, when I first started there was a much greater diversity in terms of, there were certain publishers that you knew, okay, a book published by this publisher is going to be pretty conservative evangelical, right? You just knew that. And it was helpful to know that, like Erdman's, that's what you're going to get. Well, in the last 6 years or so, they have started to try to expand their own repertoire of what they're publishing. So some of you may know of Angela Parker. She goes by Boozy Bible Scholar in her social media handles, and hopefully she'll be on here in Storytime soon in the next few months. But she had a book. I mean, she's a Black woman. She does New Testament studies. She does some public scholarship stuff, and she published with Erdman's. And so when I first saw that, I thought, what the hell? So I'm just going to ask her instead of drawing any kinds of conclusions or judgment, right? Like, what happened there? So I texted her, messaged her and said, "Hey, I noticed your amazing book, If God Still Breathes, Why Can't I?" Right? Why was that published with Erdman? Like, how did that happen? And she said, "I appreciate you asking. Here's the story. They approached me. They're trying to diversify. Like, there's more to say about that, right? But it makes it possible for her. So let's just embrace that, right?" So I found myself buying a couple books from a publisher. I would never have even stepped foot into the space of their of their book display, 7 years ago when I was there, even when I first started. And I've certainly become more progressive as over the last 20 years. So it's kind of an interesting thing, right? So some of my favorite publishers weren't even represented there, which is sad to me. I don't know why, a big publisher like Harper One wasn't even there. And there are a lot of books that they publish that are good for general audience content. And I was looking forward to that. And so I didn't get to experience that. And I don't know what the politics are there, like why they chose to not be there. Are there reasons that it isn't lucrative enough for them? Or is there something beyond, something bigger that I don't know about? So those kinds of things are interesting to me to think about. So I only purchased a few books from one publisher. Baker is also another publishing company that I think of as being very conservative. Well, I got a couple books for someone else who wanted it, and then they happened to have a book that I think I'm interested in. I'd like to bring the author on to Storytime, and I think there's something helpful potentially in this book by him, and so I'm feeling a little awkward. I'm like, I'm buying books from Baker, and I don't want anyone to see me. That was like what was running through my head, like, this is weird. I went online and purchased a couple books from Erdman's, right? This one I was just mentioning. I wanted to get Angela's book, and so they didn't have much there with them. They had a catalog, and you could flip through the catalog, and then they had a postcard, and you just scan it and get the discount. That's one of the big things about buying books at the conference. You're getting a 30, 40, 50% discount. So anyway, all of these things to say, this piece of it's kind of interesting. Sorry, I meant to delve into what I went to first and then talk about my observations later, but whether to think shoulder bag or book, oops. I missed the beginning of this conversation. Yes. What do you hear what do you think when you hear book bag? Okay. I should have brought it with me. It's up in my room. It's actually a canvas tote, really. I called it a book bag because in that space, it is the book bag, the bag to carry all the books that you're purchasing. So I should clarify, it's not a backpack. It's a two-handled tote, and they try to make it out of pretty sturdy material. This one was probably my favorite in terms of the sturdiness and the, but it doesn't have a lot of fun pockets like some of the former ones used to have. So anyway, and then there's a space on Facebook, kind of a playful group, what to do with SBL bags. Because if you go every year, right? I went 14 years in a row, so I had 14 of these bags, right? Like, I mean, after a while, like it does kind of get a little silly. Like, what do you do with all these bags? Anyway, so I wear some of them out and then I give some of them away, whatever. So anyway, I hope that was, I could go run and go get it, but I think that's a little weird to leave right now. So, but then it also has the names of these bigger publishers. Some of them feel, I have this association of them being more ideologically conservative, and it makes me a little uncomfortable to carry around a bag with that name on it. So I'll usually turn the name towards my body when I'm carrying it. Like, what is that? That's a thing that goes through my head, right? It's all connected. Anyway. So the first session I actually went to in person was, let me just make sure I'm pulling up the right one here. Yep. Nope, not that one. Oh, wait, what happened here? There we go. Okay, let me make sure I'm sharing the right. So I'm just going to share the name, the kind of the description. Oh, my laptop's not happy with this. Yeah. Let's see how that looks. All right, I think I'll try to zoom in a little bit on that. Woo! Okay. So just so you get a taste of what's going on here, I could do that. I see your comment, Anina. That's a good idea. You could upload a picture of the bag later in the community tab. I could do that. I will. Thank you. Great suggestion. So yeah, religious studies. I also, this was news to some people who've been going for a few years. So I'll just say this as well. Within biblical studies, people tend, not entirely, but tend to be more focused on, these texts and making meaning with texts, as you should expect from biblical scholars, right? In the Academy of Religion side of things, they tend to be more interested in how these things are playing out in people's lives. So people who go into religious studies tend, not across the board, but tend to be more activist oriented. So when you have biblical scholars who are activist oriented in some way, that they stand out. And I happen to be friends with people who tend to be the activist types, right, within biblical studies, so that probably doesn't surprise any of you, I guess. But so to go to religious studies content, it tends to be much more culturally engaged, if that makes sense. So this session, as I'll just read out loud what we can all see, or those who can see, cultural history of the study of religion unit. So that's the name of that unit. And so there are two different units of people on committees, right, representing particular interests, who collaborated last year and said, hey, let's do a topic, given last year this meeting was, how long after the attack on the capturing of prison, capturing of people and taking them, right? The beginning of the war on Palestine. So I'm glad that they did. I imagine they didn't expect it to still be going on. Actually, these people probably did expect it to still be going on a year later. So they came up with this particular theme a year ago, right? Constitutive absence, meaning, the subtitle helps clarify what that means: the cultural history of Palestine in religious studies. So this title tells you that hopefully the people are going to talk about how religious studies itself has been not just complicit in teaching people to not see Palestinians as real people connected to the land, but creating the space of, or the lack of, this people in the discussion of religious studies. So you can see it was just a 2-hour panel. So now that I've read the title, let me go scroll down just a little bit so you can see the names of the people who were involved. And I have to say, Rosemary Corbett, I'm really glad she was there. I think she's an independent scholar, so she's affiliated with Bard. I wanted to send her an email afterwards, and I wasn't able to find her name on Bard College's website. So I think she's an adjunct or just kind of affiliated, so she has an institutional affiliation, but she's doing amazing work. And I would recommend going over to Amazon if you're interested in this. I didn't pull that up. Let me just do that really quickly. Amazon, Rosemary Corbett. She's written a couple books about this. Corbett. Yep. So there are two. You could see that there were two. I'll pull those up really quickly in a second, but no, let's do it now because then I'll forget. So there are two books she's written recently: Making Moderate Islam, Sufism, Service, and the Ground Zero Mosque Controversy. So you can see that was 8 years ago. But if even just sitting with what the titles are telling you, right? Making Moderate Islam. So there's a history there that tells people in the West, at least, that Islam isn't peaceful. It is not peaceful. It doesn't create people who get along well in the world. We have to create a space where people who practice Islam are actually tolerable. And I'm saying all this as in, this is what's happening. This is why there was a need to so important stuff in terms of what her scholarship is about. And I thought there was something else that she had written that was different from that. Sorry about that. Okay. All right. So maybe not. So she spoke first, and what she did was she gave a bit of an overview of the history of how. Oh, sorry. Let me read the description here, and then I'll talk about her work. So Edward Said, I don't know how many of you all are familiar with the work of Edward Said. His book Orientalism, right? This is a critique. The title itself is a critique, right? The idea of creating an Orient and how that then affects the people who create this label and then use it to describe other people, right? So Orientalism is one of his big works. It was my introduction to his work in graduate school. So, but he was a Palestinian living outside of Palestine for most of his adult life as a theorist and a cultural critic, right? And his work is foundational, or one of the many important voices in getting started the critical theory realm of of talking about colonization and post-colonization and how that affects people. And he's not the only voice, but he, for me in graduate school, was kind of one of the trinity of voices you needed to read. Homi Bhabha was one of the others, and Gayatri Spivak was the third, in my context. So Edward Said's The Question of Palestine, right? So another very important book, The Question of Palestine. Just think about the title, right? Think about what that's saying. Written in 1979, posed a question, I think there's a typo here, posed a question which has yet to be answered by the liberal audiences to which it was directed. So let's just sit with this question, because I think in a sense the question is what I wanted to highlight here for you all. In what world is there no argument when an entire people is told that it is juridically absent? So legally, you as a people are not constitutive. There is no right. You're absent. Even as armies are led against it, campaigns conducted against even its name, history changed so as to prove its non-existence. So in what world is there no pushback when these things are taking place? That's what he poses, right? So, I mean, obviously, for those of you interested in this, reading this book, right, of Said's The Question of Palestine would probably be very enlightening and helpful, right? So this roundtable reckons with the ongoing implications of Said's question for scholars of religion 50 years after he posed it amid genocidal violence against Palestine that is itself underwritten by the erasure of Palestinian life and history in our academic discourse. We ask, how has religious studies figured Palestine in different contexts? Toward what political and intellectual horizons? With what stakes and consequences? So what was really interesting to me about this particular panel is that Rosemary Corbett was the only one who really talked about it, the topic. And so I was glad I was there for her paper. It was not, there were 4 people presenting. They only had a 2-hour window. So I think they had 15 minutes maybe each, maybe 20. So she presented a paper essentially showing the history of how this, within the last, say, 70 years, so right after the creation of a state of Israel, right, in 1947. And so she talked about very briefly how Houston Smith was a scholar who was heralded for his trying to kind of talk more humanly about all the various religious traditions around the world. And so his intentions were good, I think, is what she kept trying to say. His intentions were good, and he's trying to bring a more nuanced way of talking about this thing we call religion. But even as he did so I imagine very unconsciously, right, he was not aware of how influenced he was as a formerly Christian man. I don't know if he was Christian at the end of his life, but how influenced he was by Christian agendas, and how those Christian agendas were also formulated, formed in that space post-Holocaust, post-World War II. There was a lot of Christian guilt that informed decisions, and also a misunderstanding of biblical texts versus the history of the people that live on that land. So when you have even someone who's presenting as a religious studies scholar of Judaism, Christianity, Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, some of the big ones, and who in talking about Palestine is only referring to ancient, like biblical context 2,000, 3,000 years ago when he talks about Palestine. Otherwise, he doesn't actually talk about even the land, the region, the area itself as Palestine, much less the people living there as Palestinians. So he's doing that in the religious studies intros that people around the globe were reading 70 years ago, right? 60, 70 years ago. So this constitutive absence, right? How there's an intent, there's, even if it's not conscious, it is an active erasure of these people. And so it's a part of what people are being taught. And you all know, I mean, the people who are here, you all know and get the way what you're taught from people in positions of power or authority, how that affects us, how that affects human beings. And in particular, when it comes to religious traditions and ideas, like how deeply we as humans tend to take that in, and how that then informs the way we think and behave and talk about this idea or these people. So that what happened last year and is still happening, the genocide that is happening in Gaza as we speak, right? That didn't come out of thin air, and it didn't just happen because of the last 70 years either. But that was the framing of the conversation, and very beautifully done by Rosemary Corbett in her paper. She tried to share as many significant anecdotes, to help kind of share. I mean, how do you share in 20 minutes? How do you summarize in 20 minutes how this has happened, how this has gone on? But there are, she made a comment at one point about the people in Palestine, Gaza, Palestine, have been referred to as people squatting on the land for the last 1,300 years. So think about from what vantage point you are coming, if that is what it's the most audacious thing I can think to say, right? About you've literally been living there 1,300 years, but you don't think that they're actually just indigenous to the land. Like, they're just people of the land. Like, are you kidding me? Okay. That is a remarkable level of entitlement and putting Judaism first over Islam. And the thing is, as so many people have pointed out, the fighting in the land isn't really a religious fighting. It's about land. It's about politics and economics. But what fuels people's lack of being able to have a real conversation about this is this Islamophobia, right? And the constitutive absence that this group of people have not been placed front and center as, right? So it was a really very difficult paper to listen to. It was just 20 minutes, and so glad I went to that. And then the other three people talking. So this third person listed here, Sama Jaffer, is currently a PhD student at Yale University. And so she was just sharing some personal experiences as a graduate student and some of the erasure that she's experienced, or some of the events on campus, that kind of thing. Jack Downey was sharing, actually from his own experience at University of Rochester as a professor there, how just in the last week or so, there have been some students who were not given the full judicial process of their university or university, for, as he said, what I would just call extreme postering, right? They were just putting up posters, informational or resistance type posters, and they were essentially just kicked out without due process, because of that, in standing for Palestine or siding with Palestine. So in the room, there were many people who look like they could be from Palestine, have family in Palestine, that kind of a thing, or descendants of people from that region. There were people that I knew from one of my professors from Princeton Theological Seminary is an activist, big time. His name is Mark Taylor, and there are two Mark Taylors in religious studies. He's the one who's written, whose work you can tell is much more activist oriented. The Executed Christ. No. What's his one? There's one that talking about Jesus as prisoner. Anyway, I'm trying to remember what that's called, but Executed God, is that what it's called? Anyway, he's done a lot of very active, very present with people in struggling alongside of them, kind of stuff, over the many years of his work, activist work. So I was pleased to see him. I wasn't surprised at all to see him there, and what I didn't think of ahead of time is that I saw lots of people wearing scarves that you could tell are of a Palestinian theme, or were produced, right, by people in that context. Like, it has the particular patterning, things like that. So I saw, and it didn't occur to me to even do that for myself as a show of solidarity. There was something beautiful about that. Also, it's all these things feel like it's not enough. But so there was a room. I can't remember. I'm not good at guessing, because when people are there are a few people here and they're spread throughout a room. I think there may be 40 people there, but there was discussion before the panel even started about this panel itself not being well supported. Some people were concerned that it had actually been removed from the program books. It's still, as you can see, it's still in the online version, and it was in the version they mailed to me. That's how I even knew about it. But I suppose they were saying maybe there was a version that they removed. I'm not quite sure, but so there's suspicion afoot, abounding, right? And understandably concerned. So, there was it was a very tense space to be in. Just a level of anxiety about what people, not just the reality that people aren't actually talking about this very honestly, the genocide that's happening, and how awful that has been and continues to be on a daily basis for people living there. But then how that's going to shift with a new administration in this country, the influence of the United States president in that particular debacle. Anyway, so it was an interest. I'm really glad I got to see that. But there wasn't as much discussion as Sama Jaffer commented near the end of the panel. She said, this isn't the conversation I expected, because it shifted from talking about why this is happening in religious studies, why religious studies itself is complicit in this issue, to how things are playing out on campuses. And I think there's an appropriateness there, but it's also, there's also, well, what else do we say? What else can we do? Someone has acknowledged for us and kind of laid a little bit of this is the state of things. So anyway, that was a very sobering, it was a very intense panel to sit there and just be present for, and trying to learn from and understand and take in. Really glad I got to see that, but that's also a very intense, way to start your conference. Let's see. The next one that I went to after that was since I zoomed in, I've displaced things here. Let's see. Yep. Okay, here we go. So also the American Academy of Religion. So I wasn't, I did go to, there was a review panel on a book by an author I would love to have on Storytime. I don't know if she's going to agree to come. God's Ghost Writers. Some of you have probably heard about this because you've either seen it or maybe heard someone else interview Candida about this. So let me zoom in here. Oh, is that going to work? Okay. So I did, after that one, let me switch here to this other screen. I did go very briefly to this one. God's Ghost Writers, Enslaved Christians and the Making of the Bible. And, some of the I was only there for about 30 minutes, 45 minutes. So one of the things that happens at these conferences, you ask someone to, discuss a particular topic or idea, and they sometimes get off topic. people here were supposed to be reviewing this book, and sometimes people try to make it more about how their work connects to this book that is getting this attention, and so it's like riding on her coattails kind of a thing, and that just annoys me, but it happens and people do it. And so the first person speaking was doing that, and it just, I was like, oh, I'm only going to hear, one and a half of these, and this guy is making this about himself, but he's also a friend of hers, so maybe it was okay with her. I don't know. But the publisher that published this wasn't at the conference, so I couldn't buy the book there. I mean, it's kind of an interesting world these days. I was kind of sad about that, but so I will be getting this book. Part of the main takeaway here is, when I talk about Paul and his letter writing buddies, right? I'm just trying to help people think about the fact that Paul didn't write on his own. He had collaborative work. Like he was bouncing ideas off of the people with him. And then what she's doing is taking it much deeper and much more important look at the nature of those people, and that many of them were enslaved people, right? Paul would have been, taking advantage of using the resources of other people, which is people with wealth who, it feels weird to even say it, but who owned enslaved peoples, using them in his work in lots of different ways. And one of those ways, not just for Paul, but for people in the ancient world, right, was the people doing the writing were often enslaved people. So it raises this question about the scribes, right, which is what I tend to hear in relation to the Hebrew Bible, right, the scribes doing the writing and the compiling and all that stuff. And this raises a question, which is why I want to read her book, about to what extent was it just the scribes, and did we have enslaved peoples helping recopy these? When a scroll is about to fall apart and you need a new copy made, what was the nature of the person doing that makes this whole process possible, right? And even there was a snippet, there was one reference to some of what she was saying that, I'm not going to remember the letter or specifics right now, because I wasn't taking notes on that one, but yeah. But this idea that when people sit down and try to just be like transcribe what was said, that's one form of being a scribe. There's another form of being a scribe where you kind of pretty up the things that were said. And so there's some language in one or two of the letters that hint at that the person, whoever the enslaved people were, who were well educated on some level, apparently, right, actually made Paul sound better, or whoever the writer of the letter was sound better than he would have in person. Kind of just some interesting ideas that I think are worth people reflecting on, regardless of your own religious identities, but in particular for people still in Christian and Jewish contexts, to reflect on the nature of where these traditions started and at whose, who, people were benefiting at whose expense, right? So I'm very eager to read the book. Whether or not she will come join me for a conversation, we'll see if she will. I would love it if she would. So I did go hear part of that, but then I also, while I was there, so there were a handful of scholars that I know of that I would like to invite to be on Storytime. And so I'm going to stop sharing this. I can close that. I took with me some flyers. Some of you might recognize this little icon over here. But I took some flyers to hand out to scholars, and while I was there, asking them if they would consider joining me for Storytime. So while I was at the God's Ghostwriters, I did get to pass out a couple flyers there, and one of those women said she'd love to join me. Bernadette Bruton, if you want to go look her up, she's her significant contribution, though she's just a delightful human being, but her very important contribution to scholarship is Love Between Women, if you want to go look that up. So I'm delighted that and there's been there's an award in her name for for scholarship on gender and sexuality in the ancient world or whatever, in our field. Yeah. So the Bernadette Bruton. Yeah. So award. So I'm hoping she'll join us. So that was kind of fun to get to see a couple of people there that I wanted to invite, and that one of them at least is willing to do that. I think the other will be. She probably didn't have a chance to think about it or look at it at the time, and that's why it was a flyer, so she could look at it later. So let's go back to this other one that I was wanting to share with you all. This was a so notice it's religion, affect, and emotion. So even let me just close this so it's not. I'm not going to say a whole lot about this because I don't have a whole lot to say. I find intellectual engagement, right, very rewarding and fun and interesting, and I think it's kind of being pushed to think outside the way you always have. I think is a very good thing, right? So that's why I went to this session. So theorizing, thinking, feeling, and belief. What does that mean? Well. Let's read the description. This session will offer perspectives, case studies, and object lessons on the relationships between cognition, what we know, emotion, sensation, feeling, and what we call belief. It will do so at the intersection of theories of affect that have thickened and re-examined the relationship between thinking and feeling. Right? So you can see a couple theorists whose works have been important for this within religious studies in particular. Parables for the Virtual. I highlighted the wrong thing there. And then Cedric Louis. Oh gosh, I know her first name and it's not coming to me, but Cedric's Touching Feeling, right? Touching Feeling, thinking about that. And religious studies. So relationship between thinking and feeling and religious studies with a particular focus on Donovan Schaefer's book, Wild Experiment, Feeling Science and Secularism after Darwin. So, there's a lot of modern thought that's based on this kind of dichotomy between thinking and feeling. And that's the short version here. And we are embodied beings, and those two realms are not actually separate, right? Is kind of the short takeaway. I really wanted to go because of Ellen Armour. She was the third reader on my dissertation committee, and she's just a delightful human being. Her paper was titled Queering Vision, I guess. So thinking about how there is an emotional impact on us from visuals. And that's the point, right? So there's a information, right? We're taking in facts or information, and there's an emotional affect there that's happening. That is the point of photography. So she was engaging some photos to make her point here about about how the language that has presupposed that these elements of our being are separate is based on a particular worldview and a misinformed worldview, right? And there's something very powerful about being able to theorize around these elements of who we are. I'm very interested in, one of the reasons I went to this was to hear Ellen and Maya Katrosis, the third person. It just so happens that Joseph Winters was kind of the big star on the panel, which I'm not typically in the American Academy of Religion side of things. So I actually didn't know him and his work, but he had a very, very deep and provocative paper. And it was actually kind of difficult to track with him because he was trying to say a lot really fast. But in terms of the people in the room, he was kind of the big star, but not for me. I was there to hear Maya Katrosis and Ellen. Maya Katrosis, I actually didn't know she had moved to Harvard Divinity School, but when I first met her, which was in 2008, at a conference on post-colonial studies in Paul at Union Theological Seminary in New York. I had the privilege of, chatting with her over dinner a couple times, and I just remember I left that weekend thinking, this woman is super smart. Like, she's probably going to be writing the theory that other people are going to be applying to intellectual studies and somewhere down the road. So she's of that caliber in my mind, and so I wanted to hear her and hear what she was up to and hear what she was saying. So this panel was more of we used to refer to it as intellectual masturbation. What is it? Just, when you're having just this, you're kind of getting off on ideas, because a lot of academics are sapiosexuals, right? So intellectual engagement sometimes turns people on. For me, it's more of a meaningful intellectual engagement, but so that people that are just really enjoying like these ideas and talking about ideas and and just interesting vibing there, like that happens. And that was kind of happening, and that's okay, because that's a thing for some people. They need a space to do that, and that's fine. So I used to enjoy that more than I did, I guess, this time around. That was Sunday, and Monday was more about meeting with people. Monday I went to I got to hear, there's a Monday morning every year is a breakfast for female, they call it women scholars in SBL. So female scholars, and this year, and they usually do kind of a tribute to someone who's been a good role model or who's been a good mentor, right, to other scholars, so younger scholars who are benefiting from older scholars. So nurturing that in the field and valuing that, right? When you say every year that there are two women, we're going to select two, right, who've done that. People want to talk about. So usually older in their career, but women who've just been doing a lot of trailblazing in whatever capacity. So it's a very positive and encouraging space, right? And then there's usually a panel of people trying to share some ideas. And so it doesn't apply, it doesn't specifically apply to me since I'm not a full-time faculty person, but that's okay. I was happy to hear and listen to what, women sharing their wisdom and their trying to make things easier for those who come after them. That's a lovely thing. And there were just really beautiful people sharing their experiences and their insights. So, I don't have to be the person that they're referring to be inspired by it and to find it interesting. So that women's breakfast was quite meaningful for me this year. I used to be on the committee that ran that breakfast, and so for 3 years. So that was Monday morning, and then I met with someone who I've only met with virtually through Facebook, and someone her name is Jana, and I'm drawing a blank on her last name, but we've had some significant exchanges on Facebook or Messenger because of the work she's doing and she's interested in doing. And so she was meeting with other of my colleagues, just for some quick mentoring. What kinds of insights can you share? And then I got to be a part of that for her as well after that. So other people doing the heavy lifting, and I do have a couple of other insights and whatever, but so just kind of that kind of thing happening, and networking with some people. But really, I was kind of low key at this conference. I used to be much more active and much more very intense and intentional about hitting every single paper I could and making the most of every single minute. But that wasn't my experience this time. I was a little more chill. Let me share the screen of one of the Donovan. Donovan, I spelled his last name wrong. For wild things. It's not. Maybe I'm still spelling his name wrong. Here we go. Oh, Wild Experiment. I got the title wrong. If you want a good intellectual, geeking out intellectually about some ideas and things, this would do it for you. Donovan Schaefer's Wild Experiment. So thought I would plug that since I'm here. He's a delightful person and very, very, kind of functioning on a very high level there intellectually. And so the rest of Monday, I was a friend from SBL was, a friend from my seminary years. We we were in the same class, and anyway, there's a lot to say there. She had a book that was just published, but she's in even farther back. So it's an interesting thing. I've kind of been trying to name this, that people who are in the study of religion are kind of doing things that are more current day stuff, and they tend to be more, the field itself has made further strides in terms of men and women as equals in the field, or respecting women as fully human, that kind of, and DEI and inclusivity and awareness of BIPOC people and all that, and LGBTQIA plus awareness and all of that. So religious studies people tend to be much more on top of that, right? And much more aware and progressive. And so, biblical studies is a field that studies something so ancient. And so it's been, working, there've been people, kind of cutting edge people, you could say, for the last 40, 50 years, trying to change that about biblical studies. But it's, it's like a decade behind religious studies, or two, maybe even, in terms of being just the main, people are doing this stuff. And so the people that do the work that, like Josh, Dr. Josh with Digital Hammurabi, right? And Kip and Matt, like they do studies on work even farther back, historically speaking, right? Like the ancient languages and people groups. And so it's almost as if there's a connection here in terms of how far each space has to go in terms of catching up with being thoughtful of trans people have always existed. And so that plays out in our biblical text as well as the ancient text. Women have always existed and been doing the things that we do now, like the women do now, they've always been doing. So they've always been power players. It's just the narratives have not depicted them that way, right? So this particular colleague, Christine Thomas, just published a book, and it's playing with the title of one of the kind of significant book titled "The House of the Father as Fact and Symbol." Well, I got that book when I was in PhD work, and I remember thinking, I am going to not agree with this, but I think it's foundational material, like it's highly respected, right? He taught at Harvard, I think. And so he's respected as an authority on this. And I'm going to see on almost every page that there's a male bias, right? And then he's perpetuating it here instead of critiquing this ancient idea that the house is run by the man, right? Because it's just not. But everybody claims it is and asserts that it is, right? So therefore it must be, right? And so I had presumed, and it essentially was that he was reinscribing the propagandistic element of these ideas. So she was playing with the House of the Father title, and I don't remember the way she tweaked it, but she's pointing out, the role that women have always played, as mother, sister, daughter, and wife, right? Within royal families, in particular, because it's easy to see that, right? Because it's somewhat documented versus just in regular, the regular people. So, I was sitting there thinking, I was struck by how revelatory her work was for some of her male colleagues, and thinking, they're just now getting here, like, wow, but they are getting there, and she is a piece of that. And so I was struggling to not be kind of annoyed that this is revelatory to these guys, like, oh my gosh, but it was. And so I celebrate that she was there to do that, like that her work is doing that, and as she said, I don't think many people are going to read my book. And so there's the rub, right? It's deeply necessary, and people are still within that field. It's not going to necessarily be all that respected, right? So it's a slow changing field. It's a much smaller field. So, the predominantly white male demographic, and they're going to be slow to change. And so it's a really fascinating dynamic, to think the observations that she was making, and most of the people in the room. So I got to go to a review. She had a lunch. She hosted a lunch and invited people in her field. And then I happened to see her the night before. And so she included me, which was just very, very generous and sweet of her. But, so she knew the people in the field were, where they're coming from. And that some of the things she was saying about her book were just going to be startling or whatever, or pushing them. And I just remember thinking, wow, that is amazing that is pushing people in this room, but it was. So I will celebrate that, right? Whew. And also kind of fun. She's a Jewish woman, married to a Jewish woman. They have a son, and the lunch itself, and many of the people there were Jewish people, and she had shellfish, which I just thought was delightful. Of course, she kept calling it shreif, right? And that's what shreif. If you happen to be a person who eats this, off limits food, so that felt kind of edgy, even, lots of shrimp and oysters, and she had sushi and other stuff too. But anyway, it was anyways, that was a part of my day on Monday, right? That space. She had to host her own celebration of her book. Nobody else was going to do that. She's like, only 20 people are going to read my book, which it's just wild, right? It should be read by everyone in that field, She's wicked smart. Anyway, so that was a part. And then I had what was the main reason for me being at the conference itself, which was the review panel for my book. And leading up to the conference for many months, I was doing lots of mental preparation, potentially seeing people who are difficult for me, or we've had bad vibes in the past. How am I going to handle that? I don't want to get caught up in all that. But also in biblical studies, more so than in religious studies, I think it's very important for a lot of people to point out that I noticed you left this out. I don't agree with what you did with this passage. And in that kind of a discourse, I think there's a time and a place for that. And I respect that, right? I respect that's important. It's a part of what makes us sharp, to be able to point, to be able to see that I'm taking it seriously, I'm paying attention. And also, I don't think you got this, right? And that used to be much more who I am, and particularly in the the work space, but I have changed and become much more focused on the encouraging and doing something positive and constructive. So I went into this review panel expecting people to have that first part, like to need to, it sometimes looks like people kind of making a claim and staking, and that is kind of how it feels. But I knew that if that came up, that they needed to do that, and I wanted to respect that. So I was bracing, very unconsciously, I was bracing for the criticism and the pushback, and prepared to explain. Like, there were a couple pieces in particular that people have commented on, so I knew that might come up, and I wanted to be able to respond to why, or defend my choices, right? And it was none of that. It was, some of you may have seen my post actually on Facebook. There were five panelists. One was, I think I mentioned this earlier, but one was a Christian ethicist, 2 Hebrew Bible scholars, I don't have any water, and 2 Newer Testament scholars. And all 5 of them teach at theological schools. Like, they all 5 are affiliated with a divinity school or seminary, theological school, which wasn't intentional by any means, by the way. So what I can say is that, I don't know, do you want to hear what each person was trying to say? Anyway, the first person, her name is Kimberly Roussaw, Russsaw. And we knew each other in graduate school at Vanderbilt, and she likes to bring in cultural references to help her students connect to what's happening, biblically speaking. So her, I'm just so fond of her as a person, and I love watching. anyway, I love watching these colleagues and their successes and the things that they're doing. That's interesting. And so, so she brought in, she was talking about Wicked, and, but maybe now I'm thinking maybe she was actually talking about the Wizard of Oz, but whatever the case, she was talking about, how, there's a character in the movie that, or in the, in the movie, who comes in and shows that, people in Oz think everything is green, whatever, right? But she comes in and tells them to take off their green glasses, that not everything is as it seems. Not everything is as you have seen and perceived it and been told that it is. And so she made a really decent intro on that to make a comparison to what I'm doing with the Bible, in particular on the topic of marriage in the Bible, that it's not saying what you think it says. And you've been taught to think of it this way, and it's understandable that you think it's that, but it isn't that. And let's take a deeper look. So, and she made all kinds of really lovely comments, that I think, even, for people who are in theological spaces, my comments can be kind of startling for them, because they're still trying to engage the Bible at least a little bit in a positive way, constructive way. And so I'm primarily bringing criticism to the text, right? So for her, she actually found it somewhat freeing as well, as a biblical scholar who's been doing this for many years. So that was really meaningful. She was using language like, Dr. Bird gives you wings to fly, and this language she's leveling at the criticism she's leveling at the Bible is just making me defy gravity. Like, she does all this kind of great, beautiful stuff. And the second person who spoke was the Christian ethicist. And I was just very grateful she was on the panel at all, because the work she does, her name is Kate Ott, OTT. And her work for the last 20 some years has been with people, with parents and teenagers, to have more grounded conversations about sex and sexuality. And so, as many of you here know, Christian spaces are not known for doing that well. Actually, more to the point, Christian spaces are known for doing the very opposite, for harming people by not talking about it in a healthy way, by talking about it in, kind of controlling ways, and talking about sex in ways specifically that are negative and that are harmful for people, right? So she's doing really important work, and so I was really honored she was a part of it. And she, beforehand, she said, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to, I'm not in a good space right now. And she was reflecting on, the Nick Fuentes, Your Body, My Choice thing. And so her paper was actually really engaging that reality. And my book also has something to say about that, right? That there's a reason why some people today or can make these claims. And one of them is this biblical tradition teaches people to do that. And so I don't know if you've seen it. I decided to share my 2 cents on the whole, Your Body, My Choice. And that's actually my second most popular video here on YouTube, is actually my very short video about that. So, there was a lot of tears actually at this point in the panel, because she has a daughter in college who's been said that, guys have said that to her, as she walks out of her dorm room, kind of a thing. It's very real, and it's hitting close to home. And so it was a very meaningful panel. I did get to share, my own 2 cents on why I've done this, who my audience was, a brief gist of the scope I was intending, or I was trying to think within as I wrote. And I shared a few of the kind of the highlights that I think the book contributes to, not just scholarship, but also to the conversation, and can help shift or reframe the conversation in significant ways if all of these different points are taken seriously. So I got to do that first before the panelists went. And the third guy who went is someone I've known also. I've known all of these people except for one since 3 of the people I've known since I was in graduate school. One of them was a person I met in 2014 when she was finishing, or she was in graduate school, and the third has just recently finished graduate school. So, but so Ken Stone, who's at Chicago Theological Seminary, spoke. And I think his was the most, I mean, not the most, because they were all quite meaningful, but Ken's comments, we're actually from the same hometown. Kind of fun. He's a few, 6, 8 years older. But he started out by saying that he's long been fond of my scholarship, and he has used my book Permission Granted, my second book, as a textbook with his students. And he had invited me when he was dean of faculty. One year he'd invited me to do an online course for some of their students who had been exposed to my book just a chapter or two in one of his courses. So they knew how appropriate and effective it could be for them in their future congregation. So I led a course over a summer that gave these students some space to try to think through how they would take this content of Permission Granted and present it to people in their congregation. Because that's what matters, right? Like, people need to think about this. So it was special that he'd asked me to do that. Just delightful people that I got to interact with. And one of them I've stayed in touch with. And she's the one who had me come to her congregation in Wisconsin to do kind of a weekend seminar to try to address some of the marriage in the Bible content in a seminar over the weekend. And that experience led me to realize it's way too much too quickly. And that's why I decided to create a video series, was that experience, so all these things are kind of connected. And so it was really meaningful to have him say he's long been a fan of my work and things that he can see in my scholarship that are really productive and helpful for people. Just really sweet, And he said at one point, it just became a thing where I would be like, oh, she's going to talk about that too. She's going to try to, she's going to address that too. Like, yes, I'm trying to address everything I can think of about the Bible and marriage and put it all in a book and make it like kind of the go-to book, for this conversation. So really lovely. And the final person, Carrie Aldridge, has also a particular interest in abuse and intimate partner violence and the element of religious dynamics and religious conversations and doctrines that contribute to that problem. So she knew of my dissertation, which is what got me into that sphere. And I have tried to carry that over in various ways in all of the work I do because it's important to me. And she highlighted that as well in that was one of the things that I appreciated most of her review of my book. So anyway, I'm much more low key about this now, but it was overwhelming to me to have these 5 people I deeply respect, take my work so seriously, and in that space, right, in this very highly professional, this is biblical scholarship space, right, because I'm trying to meet a general audience, and they all found it very, very practically useful. So that was really lovely. I mean, it took a while for me to come down, a high from that, but also I couldn't even fully take it all in, so anyway, so that was the panel reviewing my book. And then the final morning, I did get to preside over a session. Yes, it is nice to get great feedback. It is really lovely. It was just amazing to me, honestly. Yes, I'm sorry, I wasn't paying attention to your comments much today. I'm pretty tired. So I'm not at my best here, but I saw a meme about this, and I think this is worth noting, I guess. Let the gay guys start saying "your body, my choice" to the straight guys and see just how quick they figure out the problem. Yeah. I saved a meme that had that laid out as well. Hi, Ann Stevens. It's nice to see you here. Yeah. I didn't fully read this before I put it up here. Yeah, religion acts like a shield for bad ideas. If it was a secular text defending slave. Yes, I agree, right? The people would just, oh, this is terrible stuff, right? So what did I want to say? So the last meeting. So the last thing of the meeting for me was yesterday morning. So the conference itself ends Tuesday at noon. So there's one more panel Tuesday morning, and I got to preside over it. And it was a section that, because it was a section that gender sexuality in the Bible, that's the committee I'm a part of. It's also the committee that hosted the panel for me. So that was kind of awkward. Like last year I had to ask someone else to recommend that we review my book, so it wasn't me asking, and it all still already felt kind of weird since I'm on the committee, nepotism of some sort. But everybody on the committee was very excited. And that's part of the reason I had been a part of the committee, is they knew that's the kind of work I did. So, I mean, it does kind of make sense, but it was, yeah. So the final morning, let me just share the screen with you all. So can you see that? I don't need my name in here. Well, whatever. So this was gender sexuality in the Bible, and the theme non-binary gender identities. And so, it's a new thing, I guess, to be doing this within biblical studies, and not new, but it's we're doing it's starting to do these things. And I will say that all four of these people had really very well prepared papers, and three of them had visuals that were stunning and very helpful. Actually, they all had visuals. This is a new thing, right, within biblical studies, to have people with not just reading a paper, but having visuals. And I love it. It's great. It's so helpful, So all four of them are graduate students. So this is part of their dissertation topic for most of them. So they're very into it. It's very, very well thought through. Lots of scholarship backing it all up. So really great stuff. But you can see from the titles, the first by Sage Doughty, From King to Queen, Hegemony, and Cultically Mandated Gender Fluidity in 2 Samuel 6. So he was looking, we didn't ask for pronouns, but they were looking at the way David dances in front of the ark, and how, the title says cultically mandated gender fluidity, but this issue of, the toxic masculinity, the need for the king to be masculine, all of those issues. And then this issue, this reality that I'd never noticed for those of you who are familiar with the story, where he's dancing in front of the ark, but he's buck naked, or at least exposing himself, right, to the ark, which, as he's dancing, which I don't know that I'd ever really stopped to think about, like, what that would even look like, or the way I had pictured it was much less nudity than I think the story actually suggests. But the long and short of it, I didn't intend that. Kind of the quick takeaway on that is, that, when in the first victory dancing or whatever, first celebratory thing with the ark, David was the focus instead of Yahweh. And so there's the reading that Sage offered is, that David was humbled and realized he needed to be subservient to Yahweh. But that in the way this all takes place, right, is he's dancing naked for Yahweh, right? And I, the title suggests that Sage perceives it as required. It's forced upon him to show that he's subservient to Yahweh. Yahweh's the dude, not David, all of that. But as I even listened to the way Sage was describing it, I couldn't help but think, I wonder if there was actually some delight in that for David. I don't think of there being an actual person. I'm not trying to say that this actually took place. I'm trying to say all the things and stories, the things that we know, and the homoerotic moments and relationships that are also described for him elsewhere. Like, I just wonder if, like it was a bit of a coming out for him that he could enjoy, and then he had to get back inside, I don't know. Anyway, so it was fun. It was fun to have someone, and that's tangential to what Sage was trying to say, that even within the biblical text, we see characters and people who are transcending the gender norms that we have placed upon the text. That's kind of what they were getting at, and it's an important takeaway on its own. But I really, this guy's work, this one kind of blew my mind. Tu Yu Lin, Feeding the Male Legion, Deconstructing the Coloniality of Gender in Matthew. I kind of need to be wrapping this up since I can hardly talk at this point, but I do want to just point out that what I love most about the papers I get to go hear when I go to these kinds of conventions conferences is when someone reads a text from their lived experiences, in particular when it's a geopolitical dynamic that they're bringing and highlighting for you, and then showing you how that's also potentially what's being talked about here in this text. That stuff is my favorite, right? So Tu Yu Lin is Taiwanese, and so his experiences about being from, Taiwan, and the relationship between Taiwan and the Republic of China, right? And the colonizing efforts there, and the gender conforming like ideals and propaganda and things that are placed upon them, which isn't necessarily different from what we tend to hear more indirectly in Western contexts. It's very similar. Women need to produce babies but they don't specifically say to support the empire, but it's implied, right? Very directly implied at this point in our country. So having him point out the way that played out in that context, and then he's rereading this passage that, if you've seen, the language and the stories that say there were 5,000 men, 5,008, not including women and children or something, and he was arguing for, it was specifically in Matthew's gospel, that women and children were not included, not just besides women and children, but women and children were not included. And he based that reading not only on the Greek itself, but also on his own experiences within this world, within this colonized or decolonizing or recolonizing space of Taiwan, in connection with or under the influence of the Republic of China. And so I'm just seeing things in the text that I just hadn't seen before. And I don't know that I would have ever taken the time to see, and so it just makes me so happy to have someone show me that. And it's a bit of a small detail, but it dramatically shifts the way you then read, in this case, the rest of the Gospel of Matthew. That instead of when it says, when it talks about there being crowds, that's one thing. You can assume that's men and women, or, lots of different genders. But when it's talking about the men, you need to kind of take that seriously. It's talking about the men, right? And that women are separate for lots of reasons. And we see that playing out in lots of religious traditions and lots of different locations. So it's not just unique to these one or two places, but that particular experience that he's had, and he laid it out so nicely in his paper, and it had lots of really fun visuals. So it was a lovely way to wrap up the day. The Emily Thomason, this reading of Judith was also interesting. It wasn't, it was interesting. In particular, he's trying to highlight how Judith, is celebrated for saving her people, but she's also taking on essentially a male role, and she's killing someone, and she's, it's, to me, has always been problematic, and yet I see why people celebrate it, and yet I think we also need to get to the next step of circling back to no, we're not going to celebrate this anymore. But she gets away with a lot of things because she embodies gendered, male gendered things and ways of being, and in particular, she has her enslaved woman with her, helping her do all these things. So he was looking at kind of two actually different dynamics. I think he'll probably work that out a little bit and make that a little more clear that he's actually doing two different things there. Because he's a grad student and he's studying with someone who's really is an excellent scholar, and he'll figure that out. So it was an interesting paper. But the Ishtar and Judean pillar figurines was also, it was a lovely way to wrap things up. And she, Emily Thomason, you can see at University of Chicago, showed us some images of archaeological finds and some photographs of her own of the actual finds. And so just showing us kind of the development of some of the ancient figurines predating the ones that overlap with biblical storyline. And the 800 to the Babylonian exile, so a couple, like 250 years in there. And so when you see the precursors, right, when you see these figurines that predate the ones that you're finding in Judea and Palestine, and that those, are from a particular time frame, like there's something interesting happening there in terms of why these figurines that look a lot like Ishtar, and why would those be the ones that these people in this time and place are perpetuating or having in the home, and all kinds of really interesting stuff. And so there's that level of, oh, this is fascinating what it tells us about the people that we refer to as Hebrew people and Israelites. Very interesting, material cultural artifact that we can look at and see, that's telling a different story than what the texts are telling us. That level, but then also the way that the male interpreters of this material culture were dramatically sexist in the ways they were engaging and interpreting the visuals that they were discovering, the content that they were discovering. It shouldn't, in a sense, be surprising, but it kind of still is when you see how the different forms of that takes. And so again, she is engaging a subfield that's engaging content that's even older than the biblical content. So in a sense, it doesn't surprise me that it's still that sexist without having been corrected yet. And it's a smaller field, right? So it's going to be slower to change. So on some levels, it wasn't as dramatic, but it was dramatic because she was the one pointing it out, for the first time in that field. Like, that's a big deal, right? So that's what I was engaging. And I think the Palestine piece was the one I was most thinking of when I wrote the title for today's live stream. In part because there weren't as many people supporting it as I expect there would be. There were other panels trying to just address some of the same things, but it's really stunning that there are so few people, right? What am I trying to say? This continues, right? This thing continues, and I don't hear enough being said about that particular issue in public spaces in ways that are encouraging. So, right, of course, the Bible was written by God when He created white people in the Middle East. Oh, thank you, Vajanti. I didn't see you were here. Oh, good. Yes, Vajanti was on that. Came to that panel as well. Seeing the pictures of those JPFs, that was awesome. I agree. It was very helpful to see. These are things that are associated with Ishtar. So when we see those here in this later culture, like we should give a strong consideration that it being Ishtar. Different varieties. Yeah. Yep. Thank you. I'm sorry I didn't see you.
I'm glad I'm glad that was your experience. I just didn't go to the right panels, apparently, right? You had the opposite experience, lots of talk and support for Gaza. Good. I'm glad to hear that. Yes, I did comment on this, the keffiyeh scarves, lots of people wearing those. It didn't occur to me to even have that kind of a thing to show my solidarity as well. But so there's still some of you here. So I think, so one of the things that I was thinking about mulling over is in relation to this kind of a comment. And so I appreciate you commenting, Jeff J. Most people who care about these issues, I think that could be both Palestine and also potentially women's issues, I'm not sure, are checking out from religion, I think. So do keep in mind that when I'm talking about this is a conference, about 12,000 people attended. At least 10,000 of them have PhDs in these different fields, right? So discussing this, researching, writing scholarship, teaching in classrooms, this is what they do with their life, is engaging these things. So in that space is what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about people who are checking out on religion. I'm talking about people who are that's their livelihood, is talking about these issues, right? Or not talking about them and painting a smiley face on things, or just doing the light, airy, la la la, nice and fluffy, kind of easy stuff. That's what I'm talking about. In this space where these are professionals in this field of religious studies who are not, to a large degree, not doing much in terms of, I don't know, trying to organize around or whatever. Yeah, there are lots of reasons for it. But so I just want to be clear that that's, this stream in a sense today is different from what I normally do. I'm talking about what the professionals in the field are doing. And so these are some of the observations or reflections I was having, is, the difference between, I come on here and I say all the thoughts that I have about things, critical thoughts about sexism, racism, ethnic related isms, I come in here and I say all the things that I think, and I say it based on experiences and some of the scholarship I've read over the years, but I'm free to say a lot of things out loud that a lot of scholars are not, or because there's so much work to do to be careful and to make sure that your work is going to be respectable, that it is harder to get to that place, or they're not going to be as quick to get to that place. And it's really fascinating to me that since I've been released from a full-time position, so I'm still teaching kind of tangentially, but it's not my bread and butter. Not my only bread and butter. I'm not in a department. I'm not, trying to conform to all these things, day in and day out, that I'm, in a sense, I am free to say things that others want to and can't, or, so that a lot of things that are being said at these conferences, I just feel like, yeah, like you're just now saying that, like you're just now getting that observation, or whatever. So there's an interesting tension there for me that, I don't know. So I go back and I go into this space, this professional space, and I want to respect it, and I need to respect it, right? And so I do. Like, I'm not saying out loud the things I'm thinking, because I'm still like, oh, really? Respecting that that's where the field is, and it's shocking at times to see, how what the woman's comments about the Judean figurines, pillar figurines, like having her point out these things, and it's new, it's a move in scholarship that needs to be made, that hasn't been made. And it's just wild, right? Like, oh my gosh, that hasn't been done. That's how how not progressive or whatever the thinking is in this field. So I think there is something really helpful to be in that space and to realize that's where things are, right? But I also saw, some people who are interested in the public scholarship realm of things, kind of coming in guns blazing, and that was kind of hard for me, to see someone wearing a T-shirt that it would have been fine to wear at the theology beer camp conference, if you all are familiar with that, the Theo Bros, but of a progressive type. It would have been fine to wear that T-shirt there, but it was deeply offensive to me to see it at a professional conference, and for this person to not be aware that that's not actually appropriate. And so there's an element of read the room. There's an element of just not really appreciating all that goes into being in this space for most of the people, right? Most of the people there have at least a master. Like, I would say everyone, like 99% of the people, have at least a master's degree in this stuff, if not multiple masters and a PhD. And so there's, it's kind of a good and a bad, right? There's a rub there. Is it good that the professionalization of people? Well, I think there's a piece of it that is actually really helpful, right? But seeing people coming in and not really understanding how they relate to what's happening, teach your children well, right? Teach your children to read the room. Spend enough time to understand the spaces you're getting into before you show yourself fully or whatever, before you just kind of come in and be yourself. Like, I'm all for people being themselves, but there's a really important thing about living together and working together that requires that we actually understand the spaces we're in, and respecting what's going on in the spaces we're in. I don't know. So that was a kind of a disheartening thing that happened for me a few times. But at the same time, I'm glad that these people are coming to the conference, right? So there's a rub there, and things are shifting and changing, and that's good. Okay, there's something happening here that that's it. That's what happened for me at the conference. It was the best conference I've been for 15 times now, 16 times now. And that was the best one for me of all of those. And they have all had their moments of really amazing, meeting the scholars who helped shape my voice, and all kinds of great highlights. Each one of them, each one of them had amazing things. But for me, in terms of my well-being and my contentedness afterwards, excuse me, I need to get off here. I think this was the best one so far. So that's nice. And I owe it to my brother and sister-in-law who have helped me get here to California to be able to be there. I wouldn't be doing it if it weren't for them. So another shout out to them. That's it on this. I'm gonna next week. I can't remember if I have a person on or if it's just me. But when I circle back to doing some story time of using scripture, we're gonna pick up where we left off on Acts. I've had some people ask me to do a follow-up to the Nick Fuentes video that I did, offering some things in terms of what you can do to address this issue. And I actually do have some insights because of, excuse me. I don't know how to turn off my mic while I cough. I guess I could mute it, couldn't I? Yeah, I was muting the wrong thing. Because of the panel and what the ethicist was saying about things that she says to people, that she helps people with these kinds of conversations. So I do have some thoughts. So I will be making a video soon, following up on that. Some productive, just basic, pragmatic kind of stuff you can do. Coming up, though, I do have some fun. We're going to have Josh Bowen on in a couple weeks, and Dan McClellan's going to be here. And I'm really looking forward to, in the new year, having a whole bunch of scholars, people I have loved and adored for many years, who will be joining me here on Storytime in the new year. So that'll be something to look forward to. Thank you all for being here. Hey, I thought I would also say thank you to those of you who support me financially through Patreon or through the memberships here. I'd prefer, if you're going to support me now, to do that through the memberships, because Apple is taking a 30% chunk. Excuse me, if you're a new supporter. Just something to keep in mind. Also, if you like this kind of content, I have done 3 seasons of a podcast called Wild Olive, game-changing conversation about literature, culture, and the Bible. And I've done that with a literature professor. So it's a literature, biblical scholar engagement, and it's really fun conversations about biblical passages, biblical topics, biblical books, whatever, that show up in the culture in some way. And we have really fun conversations. You can find that anywhere you find podcasts. And that's it. I think I've had, thank you, Anina, for that little endorsement of Wild Olive. Yes, that is true. Josh is Megan's husband. I like that you said it that way. Yes, I'm sure he would appreciate that and approve of that as well. Thank you, Pragmatic Crystal, for the things being here. Yes, you're still there for Bowen. Great. He'll be here in December, sometime in December, the week before Dan, I think. So thank you for being here. Thanks for watching. Thanks for chatting, giving each other some fun community chat and connection. And I'll see you all next week. We're gonna go out with a little something here. Thanks, everyone.